Hello students, welcome to the first year logic class. In the last class, we were discussing about the classification of propositions. The last classification of propositions is still there to be discussed. So, the last classification of propositions is from the standpoint of mixed principles of quality and quantity. So, as you know, from the standpoint of quality, propositions are divided into affirmative and negative propositions. From the standpoint of quantity, propositions are divided into universal and particular propositions. So, you know what is a universal proposition? A universal proposition is one in which the predicate is affirmed or denied of the entire class of the subject term. For example, no men are perfect. So, here the predicate is denied of the entire class of the subject term. This is a universal proposition. And particular proposition is one in which the predicate is affirmed or denied of some members of the subject term. So, you have affirmative proposition, negative proposition, then universal proposition and then particular propositions. Now, by combining this quality and quantity, we get 4 different type of categorical propositions. आमे क्वालिटी और क्वांटिटी को कंबाइन करिकरी से दुईटा प्रिंसिपल्स को कंबाइन करिकरी आमे चारिटा कैटेगोरिकल प्रोपोजिशंस पाउचो. नाउ व्हाट आर दिस 4 कैटेगोरिकल प्रोपोजिशंस? द फर्स्ट वन इज यूनिवर्सल affirmative proposition, universal negative proposition, then particular affirmative proposition and then particular negative propositions. Universal affirmative proposition is known as A proposition. Universal negative proposition is technically known as E proposition. Then particular affirmative proposition is technically called I proposition. Then particular negative proposition is technically known as O proposition. Now, let us see the symbolic examples of these propositions. Universal affirmative proposition. Universal affirmative proposition is A proposition. The symbolic example is all S is P. A stands for the subject and P stands for the predicate. This is the symbolic example. Then concrete example, all students are sincere. So, students, now come to the universal negative proposition. This is known as E proposition. No S is P. No men are perfect. This is your concrete example. Then particular affirmative proposition. This is known as I proposition. Symbolic example is some S is P and concrete example is some students are honest. Now, the next one is particular negative proposition and this is known as O proposition and the symbolic example is some S is not P and concrete example is some students are not honest. Okay. So, from the mixed principles of quality and quantity, we have these 4 type of categorical propositions. Ei charita categorical propositions amara achi. Now, we will discuss distribution of terms. Distribution of terms. So, all of you came to know the 4 categorical propositions. In one proposition, there are 2 terms, subject term is there and predicate term is there. Now, we say the term is distributed, the term is undistributed. When do we say that? A term is said to be distributed if it stands for the whole class, if it stands for the entire class, and a term is said to be undistributed if it stands for some members of the class. ता माने जेतेबेले आमे एंटायर क्लास को नौचु होल क्लास को नौचु से टर्म टा दैट टर्म डेजिग्नेटिंग दैट क्लास is said to be distributed. When we say about some members of the class, that term designating that class is said to be undistributed. Okay? Now, you know there are two propositions, affirmative propositions and negative propositions. In an affirmative proposition, there is a relation of inclusion between two terms. That means, the members of one class are included in the another class. This is your affirmative proposition. Then in a negative proposition, there is a relation of exclusion. That means, some members of the class are excluded from the other class. तेणु affirmative proposition रे कौन हुए केते गुडे मेंबर से माने आउ गोटे क्लास भितरे रही थांती गोटे क्लास आउ गोटे क्लास भितरे रही थाए आउ नेगेटिव प्रपोजिशन रे कौन हुए गोटे क्लास आर क्लास रो बाहरिकरी रही थाए दैट इज द रिलेशन ऑफ एक्सक्लूजन. ओके, नाउ व्हेन ऑल द मेंबर्स ऑफ ए क्लास आर सेड टू बी इंक्लूडेड विद इन अनदर क्लास और आर एक्सक्लूडेड फ्रॉम द अदर क्लास, the term is said to be distributed. जदि गोटे क्लास अच्छी से क्लास को आमे होल क्लास भाव में नहींचु एंटायर क्लास नहींचु से जो एंटायर क्लासटा जदि आउ गोटे क्लास भितर रहिला इनक्लूड होकरी रहिला नहेले से एंटायर क्लासटा आर क्लास रु बाहरिकरी रहिला पूरा पूरी बाहरे रहिला ताहेले दैट टर्म डेजिग्नेटिंग द क्लास विल बी सेड टू बी डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड. तेणु जेतेबेले आमे एंटायर क्लास को नौचु होल क्लास को नौचु सेतेबेले से टर्म टाको डिस्ट्रीब्यूट हैला बोली कुहा जाउची. When some members of a class are said to be included within another class or excluded from the other class, then the term designating that class is said to be undistributed. जदि आमे सम मेंबर्स को नहींचु सम मेंबर्स गोटे क्लास रो केते गुडे मेंबर्स को नहींचु एंटायर क्लास को नहीं ना हो जदि सम मेंबर्स आउ गोटे क्लास भितरे रहिले नहेले से क्लास टू पूरा पूरी बाहरे रहिले ताहेले सेई टर्म टाको आमे कहूछु अनडिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड टर्म. नाउ A proposition, we have four categorical propositions A, E, I and O propositions. A proposition, look at the A proposition, all students are honest. So, here subject is all students, here we have taken the entire class of students. Here we mean the entire class of students and predicate is honest. Here what do we say? We say that the entire class of the students, that means the entire students class is included within the honest class. Each and every member of the student class is a member of the honest class. And here you see the circles, the diagram, the students, this circle is included within the honest class. So, here we have taken the entire class of the subject term, all students, but we have not taken the entire class of the honest people. एठी आमे स्टूडेंट्स रा एंटायर क्लास को नहींचु किंतु ऑनेस्ट रा एंटायर क्लास को नहीं ना हो बिकॉज अपार्ट फ्रॉम द स्टूडेंट्स देयर आर मेनी पीपल हु आर ऑनेस्ट देयर आर डॉक्टर्स देयर आर इंजीनियर्स देयर आर टैक्सी ड्राइवर्स देयर आर रिक्शा पुलर्स मेनी आर ऑनेस्ट बट वी आर नॉट सेइंग एनीथिंग अबाउट दोज पीपल तेणु एठी आमे ऑनेस्ट रो पूरा क्लास टा को नहीं ना हो केवल स्टूडेंट रो पूरा क्लास को नहींचु तेणु here student class is included within the honest class and A proposition distributes the subject term because here we have taken the entire class of the subject term. So, subject is distributed. Now, E proposition, no students are honest. Here we mean that the entire class of the students are excluded from the entire class of the honest people. So, there is no relation between students class and honest people class. तांका भितरे कोनोसी प्रकार relation नहीं. Here you find there is a relation of exclusion. That means one class is excluded from the other class. गोटे class आरो class टारू बाहरी करी रहिछि. No member of the student class is a member of the honest class. No member of the honest class is a member of the student class. So, here you see students and honest, they form two different classes. एमाने दीटा अलगा अलगा class करूचंती. Here we have taken the entire class of the students and also entire class of the honest people. And E proposition distributes both subject and predicate. Okay. Now, we will move to the I proposition. Some students are honest. So, subject here some S is P. Subject here is some students. So, some students here we have not taken the entire class, pura class को नहीं ना हो. We are saying about some members of the class. Then some members are honest. Here also we have not taken the entire class of the honest people, because apart from these students there are many people who are honest. So, here we are saying about some members of the subject class and some members of the honest class. So, I proposition does not distribute any term. Here you see the diagram. In this diagram, these two circles partially overlap. Some students are honest. Some students means at least one student must be there, at least one student. So, 2 represents this I proposition. So, I proposition does not distribute any term. Now, O proposition. O proposition, some students are not honest. So, here subject is some students. Some students we have not taken the entire class. We are saying only about some members of the students class. So, here the term is not distributed. Here we say that some students are there. Some students means at least one student is there who is excluded from the entire class of the honest people. तेणु गोटे हेले स्टूडेंट अच्छी जी कि ऑनेस्ट क्लास रो पूरा क्लास रु अलगा हेकरी रहुची. सो एठी कौन होची पिले एठी here you find this you see this diagram. In this diagram one represents this O proposition. So, some students are there who fall completely outside the honest class. So, here subject term is not distributed, but predicate is distributed. We have taken the entire class of the predicate term. Okay. So, O proposition distributes only predicate. एटा को पिले मने रखिबो बहुत important. So, A proposition all S is P, A distributes subject. E proposition no S is P, E distributes both subject and predicate. Then I proposition some S is P, I does not distribute any term. Then O proposition some S is not P and O proposition distributes predicate. Here we have two universal propositions A and E propositions. A proposition distributes subject and E proposition distributes both subject and predicate. So, here in these two propositions subject is commonly distributed. Subject distribute heichi. तेणु तमर क्वेश्चन जदि आसीबो universal propositions distribute their dash, you have to write subject. Then you have negative propositions. E proposition is a negative proposition, O proposition also is a negative proposition. E distributes both subject and predicate and O distributes predicate. So, both the propositions distribute their predicates. So, question asibo negative propositions distribute their dash. You have to write negative propositions distribute their predicates. Okay. So, now students we will move to the sevenfold relation between propositions. So, proposition all of you know. Suppose there are two propositions P is one proposition and Q is one proposition. Duita proposition achi. So, what type of relation can exist between the two propositions? There can be 7 type of relations between these two propositions. So, what are these 7 type of relations? Independence, equivalence, contrary, subcontrary, contradictory, superalternation and subalternation. Now, we will discuss all these relations one by one. Now, independence. So, here what happens? Two propositions are there, P is there, Q is there. They are completely independent of each other. That means, there is actually no relation between these two propositions. Kichi relation nahi. That means, from the truth or falsity of one, we cannot infer the truth or falsity of the other, because they are independent propositions. So, if you have these type of propositions, then these propositions cannot occur in any argument. In any argument means in one and the same argument. These cannot occur either as the premises or as the conclusion in one and the same argument. Okay? सेमाने conclusion भावरे यूज हेई परिबेनी किंबा premise भावरे यूज हेई परिबेनी same argument रे. काहेकि ना in one argument conclusion always follows from two premises taken jointly. गोटे आर्ग्युमेंट रे जो दुईटा प्रपोजिशन थाए ता भितर रिलेशन थिबारु आमे कंक्लूजन को आसुछु. But if there will not be any relation between these two propositions, then how can we draw any conclusion? So, these propositions cannot occur as the premises or as the conclusion in one and the same argument. For example, trees are green and students are sincere. So, here you see these are two propositions. If one proposition, if we know that one proposition is true or false, we cannot know anything about the truth or falsity of the other proposition. गोटे proposition true किंबा false हेले आरो proposition टा true कि false हबो सेटा हमें जानी पारिबा नाही. And you know, in one argument there are only 3 terms, but here you have 4 unconnected terms. So, if we have these two propositions in one argument, we commit a fallacy, and that fallacy is the fallacy of 4 terms. Now, we will move to the next one, equivalence. Here, two propositions P and Q are equivalent to each other. Equivalent means their meaning is same. Meaning is same. As they are equivalent, as the meaning is same, then if one is true, the other is true. If one is false, then the other also is false, because meaning is same. If I say if I say Gandhiji was killed by Nathuram Godse, and another proposition Nathuram Godse killed Gandhiji. Nathuram Godse killed Gandhiji and Gandhiji was killed by Nathuram Godse. These are two propositions, meaning is same. So, if one is true, other is true. If one is false, other also is false. So, this is the relation of equivalence. Now, we will move to the next one, contrary relation. In contrary relation, two propositions P and Q are contrarily related. So, here if one is true, if one proposition is true, the other proposition is false, but not conversely. Both the propositions can be false together, but both the propositions cannot be true together. Now, This contrary relation holds between A and E propositions. For example, A proposition, all roses are fragrant, and E proposition, no roses are fragrant. Here you see, if A proposition is true, मु जदि कहिबी जे सबु गोलाप गुड़ा सुगंध तार सुगंध अच्छी, सबु गोलाप फूलर सुगंध अच्छी, all roses are fragrant. If this is true, then no roses are fragrant must be false. If all roses are fragrant is true, then no roses are fragrant must be false. If no roses are fragrant is true, then all roses are fragrant must be false. Okay? But if I say all roses are fragrant is a false proposition, जदि एटा false हैला, then what about no roses are fragrant? जदि all roses are fragrant false हैला, ताहले no roses are fragrant may be true, may not be true. We cannot say anything regarding the truth or falsity of E proposition. Here both can be false together. दीटा जाक एकाठी false हे परिबो. केमिति? Suppose some roses are fragrant and some roses are not fragrant. केते गुडे रोज रो बासना अछि, सुगंध अछि, आउ केते गुडे रोज रो बासना नाही. जदि एटा हैला ताहले all roses are fragrant false हेइछबो, then no roses are fragrant मध्ये false हेइछबो. But both the propositions cannot be true together. तुमे कहि परिबनी जे all roses are fragrant true, आउ no roses are fragrant is also true. दीटा जाका opposite, दीटा जाका केबे true हेइ परिबे नाही. So this is your contrary relation. Now we will discuss sub-contrary relation. Two propositions P and Q are sub-contrary to each other. When one is false, the other is true, but not conversely. Both can be true together, but both cannot be false together. केमिति होउची? Sub-contrary relation holds between I and O proposition. I and O propositions. I proposition, some men are honest. O proposition, some men are not honest. मु जदि कहिबी some men are honest is a false proposition. Suppose it is false. Some men are honest होउची false. ताहले ठीक कोटा हबो? Some men are not honest. This will be true. If some men are honest is false, then some men are not honest will be true. If one is false, the other will be true. If some men are not honest is false, then some men are honest will be true. Both the propositions can be true together. Some men are honest true हेइ परिबो, some men are not honest मध्ये true हेइ परिबो. दुईटा जाक एकाठी true हेइ परिबे. So both can be true together. एकाठी true हेइ परिबे. But both cannot be false together. आमे कहि परिबानी जे some men are honest is false and some men are not honest is also false. दुईटा जाक false हेइ परिबो नाही. Okay? So this is your sub-contrary relation. Now contradictory relation. In contradictory relation, two propositions are so related that if one is true, the other is false. If one is false, the other is true. Here the opposition is complete. In contrary, here the opposition is complete, yes, and this contradictory relation holds between A and O propositions and E and I propositions. A and O, E and I are contradictorily related. A proposition, all students are sincere. O proposition, some students are not sincere. All students are sincere. जदि सबु students sincere true हुए ताहले some students are not sincere निश्चिंत भाव रे false हबो. जदि some students are not sincere ट्रू हुए ताहले ऑल स्टूडेंट्स आर सिंसियर निश्चिंत फॉल्स हबो ओके बट इफ आई से ऑल स्टूडेंट्स आर सिंसियर इज फॉल्स देन सम स्टूडेंट्स आर नॉट सिंसियर must be true okay if some students are not sincere is false then all students are sincere must be true तेणु कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी अपोजिशन रे से माने पूरा पूरी अपोजिट ए आउ ओ भितरे ई आउ आई भितरे कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी रिलेशन रे रहिबो जदि ए प्रपोजिशन ट्रू हैला ओ प्रपोजिशन फॉल्स हबो इफ ओ इज फॉल्स ए इज ट्रू so if one is true the other is false if one is false the other is true now super alternation relation here two propositions P and Q are so related that if P is true, Q is true. If P is false, then Q is undecided. This super alternation relation holds between A and I proposition and E and O propositions with same subject and same predicate. So, here you see we have universal propositions A and E. A and E are called superalterns and I and O are called subalterns. Now, let us take the example A proposition is all students are honest, I proposition is some students are honest. Now, A proposition is universal, I proposition is particular. If universal is true, then particular must be true. If I say all girls are pretty, then some girls must be pretty. यदि सबू girls pretty देखिबा पई ताले some girls मध्ये pretty हेबे. So, if universal is true, particular also is true. So, if A is true, I also is true. But if universal proposition is false, जदि आमे कहिबा all students are honest is a false proposition, then what will be your particular proposition? Particular proposition may be true, may be false. This remains undecided. Okay? So, in super alternation relation, if universal is true, particular is true. But if universal is false, particular may be true, may be false. It remains undecided. Then next one is subalternation relation. In subalternation relation, two propositions P and Q are so related that if Q is false, P is false. If Q is true, then P remains undecided, and the subalternation relation holds between I and O propositions. It holds between I and A propositions, then O and E propositions. Now, let us take this I and A propositions. Here I and O propositions are particular propositions. So, they are called subalterns, and A and E propositions are known as superalterns. Now, this relation holds between I and A proposition, I and A proposition and O and E propositions. Here the particular proposition is some students are honest. If this particular proposition is false, then the universal proposition also is false proposition. If particular is false, universal also will be false. मु जदि कहिबी जे some girls are pretty is false, then all girls are pretty must be false. Okay. But if I say some students are honest is a true proposition, then what about all students are honest? Jodi some students are honest true hele, tahale all students are honest true hei pare, true madhya na hei pare. Jodi all students are honest, it will be true. If some students are only honest and some are not honest, then it will be false. So, if particular proposition is false, then universal proposition is false. If particular proposition is true, universal proposition is undecided. Now, we will discuss the opposition of propositions. Now, we discussed sevenfold relation between propositions. Out of these 7 relations, last 5 cases are cases of opposition. Now, what do we mean by opposition of propositions? Two propositions are opposed to one another if they have the same subject and same predicate, but differ either in quality or in quantity or in both. जदि दुईटा प्रपोजिशन थिबो, दुईटा प्रपोजिशन रे सब्जेक्ट प्रेडिकेट समान थिबे किंतु से माने डिफरेंट होउथिबे कोउथिरे ना क्वालिटी रे और क्वांटिटी रे और बोथ क्वालिटी एंड क्वांटिटी. ता माने इफ वन इज अफर्मेटिव अदर इज नेगेटिव और वन इज यूनिवर्सल द अदर इज पर्टिकुलर और वन इज यूनिवर्सल अफर्मेटिव द अदर इज पर्टिकुलर नेगेटिव, ताहेले ताकू आमे कहिबा जे सेमानंक भितरे रिलेशन ऑफ अपोजिशन रहिछि. नाउ द अरिस्टोटेलियन लॉजिशियंस रिप्रेजेंट द रिलेशन ऑफ अपोजिशन among 4 categorical propositions with the help of a square. So, we have 4 categorical propositions. You know there are 4 categorical propositions A, E, I and O propositions. Charita proposition amaro achi. Now, there can be 4 type of relation between among these 4 propositions. Contrary relation holds between A and E propositions. Subcontrary relation holds between I and O propositions. Then on the left side we have AI propositions. AI both are affirmative. On the right side we have EO propositions, both are negative propositions. So, subalternation relation holds between A and I proposition, E and O propositions. Then there is the contradictory relation. Contradictory relation holds between A and O propositions and E and I propositions. Now, let us discuss this relation of opposition between propositions. Now, what is this contrary opposition? Contrary opposition is the relation holding between two universal propositions A and E propositions having same subject and same predicate, but differing in quality. Contrary opposition आमर A आउ E भितरे रहुछि दुईटा जक यूनिवर्सल प्रपोजिशंस किंतु सेमानकर क्वालिटी डिफरेंट. A proposition affirmative, E proposition negative and they have same subject and same predicate. Here I have already told in contrary relation or in contrary opposition, if one is true the other is false. But if one is false the other is undecided and both can be false together, but both cannot be true together. All poets are romantic, A proposition, no poets are romantic, E proposition. If all poets are romantic is a true proposition, then if this is true then no poets are romantic is false proposition and both can be false together. आमे कहि परिबा जे दुईटा जाक false, केतेबेले दुईटा जाक false हबो जेतेबेले some poets are romantic and some poets are not romantic, सेतेबेले दुईटा जाक false हे जिवो. Both can be false together, but both cannot be true together. We cannot say all poets are romantic is true and no poets are romantic is true. Both cannot be true together. This is your contrary opposition. Then subcontrary opposition. This subcontrary opposition holds between two particular propositions I and O propositions having same subject and same predicate. I proposition, some men are educated, O some men are not educated. तेणु ये आमर आई आउ ओ प्रपोजिशन रहिला दुईटा प्रपोजिशंस भितरे आमर सब कंट्रारी अपोजिशन रहिला. सब कंट्रारी अपोजिशन माने कौन? इफ वन प्रपोजिशन इज फॉल्स द अदर प्रपोजिशन मस्ट बी ट्रू. बोथ कैन बी ट्रू टुगेदर बट बोथ कैन नॉट बी फॉल्स टुगेदर. Here if one is false, जदि some men are educated जदि false हैला ताहले some men are not educated निश्चिंत भावरे true हबो. जदि some men are not educated false हैला then some men are educated must be true. But if we say some men are educated is a true proposition, then what about some men are not educated? It may be true, may not be true. It is undecided. Both can be true together. आमे कहि परिबा some men are educated is true, some men are not educated मध्य true. दुईटा जाक एकाठी true हेई परिबो. So both can be true together. But दुईटा जाक एकाठी false हेई परिबो नाही. आमे कहि परिबानी जे some men are educated is false and some men are not educated, this is also false. We cannot say like that. So this is subcontrary opposition. Now the next opposition is contradictory opposition. Here the contradictory opposition holds between two propositions, the two diagonals in that square, that is between A and O and E and E, E and I. They have same subject, same predicate, but they differ in both quality and quantity. दुईटारे differ करुछंती. So contradictory opposition is the complete opposition. Here we find the complete opposition between the two propositions. But in contrary opposition and subcontrary opposition, opposition is partial from one side. कारण contrary रे हमें देखिछु if one is true, other is false, but not conversely. So opposition is partial. Subcontrary रे मध्य सेमिति if one is false, the other is true, but not conversely. There also the opposition is partial. But here opposition is complete. Complete means if one is true, the other is false. If one is true false, then the other also is true. Other is true. So here all students are honest is A proposition and some students are not honest, it is O proposition. Now if I say all students are honest is true, then some students are not honest, must be false. If I say some students are not honest is true, if जदि एटा true हैला ताहेले all students are honest must be false. And if I say all students are honest is false, then some students are not honest must be true. If some students are not honest is false, then all students are honest must be true, because the opposition is complete. If one is true, the other is false. If one is false, the other is true. Now the next opposition that is the subalternation opposition. आमर जेतेबेले आमे सेवेन फोल्ड रिलेशन करिथिलु सेथिरे आमर दुईटा अपोजिशन थिला, गोटे सबअल्टरनेशन थिला, गोटे सुपर अल्टरनेशन थिला. किंतु सेठी सेई जो दुईटा थिला सबअल्टरनेशन रिलेशन एंड सुपर अल्टरनेशन रिलेशन, एठी सेटा दुईटा जाक गोटे हेडिंग रे आसीचे सबअल्टरनेशन अपोजिशन. सो दिस सबअल्टरनेशन अपोजिशन होल्ड्स बिटवीन टू अफर्मेटिव प्रपोजिशंस A and I and two negative propositions E and O having same subject and same predicate, but differ only in quantity. से माने दुईटा अफर्मेटिव प्रपोजिशन भितर सबअल्टरनेशन रिलेशन रहिबो, दुईटा नेगेटिव भितर सबअल्टरनेशन रिलेशन रहिबो, से माने डिफर करिवे केवल क्वांटिटी रे। क्वांटिटी माने इफ वन इज यूनिवर्सल अदर इज पर्टिकुलर। ओके, नाउ the universal proposition A and E are known as superaltern, and the particular propositions your I and O are known as subalterns. Here from the universal side, if we see, if universal is true, particular is true. Aguru mu kahichi, if universal is true, particular is true. Here you see the example, all students are scholars, some students are scholars. All students are scholars. If the universal is true, then some students are scholars also will be true. If all students are scholars is false, then some students are scholars may be true, may be false. This remains undecided. Then on the other side, from the particular side, we see if the this from the particular side, this relation holds between I and A propositions. Some students are scholars, and A proposition, all students are scholars. Here I proposition is particular and A proposition is universal. If I proposition, if particular is false, then universal also will be false. If some girls are pretty is false, then all girls are pretty must be false. So, if particular is false, then universal also is false. But if particular is true, then universal may be true, may not be true. It may be true, may be false. So, this is the relation of subalternation, opposition between propositions. तेणु मु तुमको 7-fold relation between propositions कहीदेली, तापरे 4-fold relation of opposition between propositions मध्य कहिली. So, students, now we will discuss reduction of propositions into their logical forms. You know, if a proposition is there and that is a logical proposition means the three parts should be distinctly shown. That means subject will be there, predicate will be there, and copula also will be there, and quality and quantity of the proposition should also be mentioned. Okay. So, दीटा जिनस गोटे है सब्जेक्ट प्रेडिकेट कपुला अलग अलग देखा अलग अलग होकरी रही थिबो. सेकेंड है क्वालिटी और क्वांटिटी को तुम्हें से प्रपोजिशन रे मेंशन हेथिबो, ताहेले सेटा हबो लॉजिकल प्रपोजिशन. ओके. But if a proposition is there in which three parts are not kept separate, or quality is not mentioned or quantity is not mentioned, in that case you have to reduce that proposition to its logical form. Okay. There are some directions by which we can do this reduction. First rule is all affirmative propositions having the words all, every, each, any, anyone whole will be reduced to a proposition. जदि तुमर गोटे affirmative proposition थिबो, से affirmative proposition रे all, every, each, any, anyone whole जेकोनोसी गोटे word थिबो, ताहेले सेटा a proposition को reduce हबो. ता माने all s is p को reduce हबो. All men are mortal, this is a proposition, you know. Every girl is pretty. Here you have to reduce this to all girls are pretty. Any man is able to do this. You will reduce this to all men are able to do this. A proposition. Each student is disciplined. You reduce this to all students are disciplined. A proposition. Then तमर जदि नेगेटिव प्रपोजिशन थिबो, नेगेटिव प्रपोजिशन रे एई वर्ड भितर गोटिए थिबो, ताहेले सेटा ओ प्रपोजिशन को रिड्यूस हे जिवो. ओ मीन्स सम एस इज नॉट पी. लेट अस सी सम एग्जांपल्स. एवरी मैन इज नॉट ए डांसर. सो दिस विल बी some men are not dancers. Each Indian is not a lover of music. Some Indians are not lovers of music. anyone is not able to do this, some men are not able to do this. O proposition, all are O propositions. Any man cannot do this, एठी कपुला नाही, तुमको कपुला मेंशन करबा को पड़िबो. Some men are persons who cannot do this. All that glitters is not gold. Some glittering objects are not gold. So all these are reduced to O proposition. तापरे नेक्स्ट होची जदि तुमर अफर्मेटिव प्रपोजिशन थिबो आउ प्रेडिकेट जदि क्वालिफाई हेइथबो ए वर्ड्स द्वारा ऑलवेज सर्टेनली नेसेसरीली एब्सोल्यूटली ताहेले सेटा को तमे यूनिवर्सल अफर्मेटिव प्रपोजिशन को करिवो. यूनिवर्सल अफर्मेटिव माने ए प्रपोजिशन दैट इज योर ऑल एस इज पी. लेट अस सी सम एग्जांपल्स. वाइज मेन आर ऑलवेज रेस्पेक्टेड. ऑल वाइज मेन आर रेस्पेक्टेड. ये वर्ड गुड़ा को तमे बाद कर दबो आ रखिबनी, केवल ऑल एस इज पी को नहीं आसीबो. ऑल वाइज मेन आर रेस्पेक्टेड. मेन आर सर्टेनली सेल्फिश. ऑल मेन आर सेल्फिश. मेन आर नेसेसरीली प्लेजर सीकर्स. ऑल मेन आर प्लेजर सीकर्स. करप्ट पीपल ऑलवेज फियर पुलिस. एठी कपुला नाही, केमती लेखिबो ऑल करप्ट पीपल आर पर्सन्स हु फियर पुलिस. Real saints are absolutely unworldly. So this will be all real saints are unworldly. So all these we are reduced to A propositions. किंतु जदि तुमरा नेगेटिव प्रपोजिशन थिबो आउ ए वर्ड भितर गोटे थिबो ताहेले सेटा कोठी की रिड्यूस होबो O प्रपोजिशन को रिड्यूस होबो. Some S is not P. Rich people are not necessarily happy. So here you will reduce it to O proposition. Some rich people are not happy. Women are not necessarily inferior to men. Some women are not inferior to men. Then men are certainly not selfish. Some men are not selfish. O proposition. Cowards are not always wicked. Some cowards are not wicked. So all these are reduced to O proposition. Next, propositions in which we find the words no and never, they will be reduced to universal negative proposition E proposition. The great men never tell lies. एठी कपुला नाही, तुमे एठी लेखिबो no great man is a person who tells lies. नहले no great men are persons who tell lies. Man is never perfect. This will be reduced to E proposition. No man is perfect. Then next rule is जदि affirmative proposition थिबो ता भितरे गोटे word आ भितरु थिबो some थिबो नाले a few नाले certain नाले most नाले many या भितरु गोटे word थिबो then you will reduce that proposition to particular affirmative proposition, that is your I proposition. Some S is P. Some students are sincere. This is your I proposition. A few vegetables are nutritious. एठी लेखिबो तुमे some vegetables are nutritious. Certain roses are red. He will write some roses are red. I proposition. Most students are sincere. Some students are sincere. This is also I proposition. तेणु ए गुडा को तुमे I proposition को reduce करिवो. किंतु जदि तुमरा नेगेटिव प्रपोजिशन थिबो आउ एई वर्ड भितरु गोटे वर्ड थिबो सम ए फ्यू सर्टेन मोस्ट मेनी ताहले ताकु तमे ओ प्रपोजिशन को रिड्यूस करिबो. सम एस इज नॉट पी. मोस्ट लेडीज आर नॉट गुड हाउसवाइफ्स. some ladies are not good housewives. This is O proposition. A few students are not sincere. Some students are not sincere. O proposition. Certain games are not attractive. Some games are not attractive. O proposition. Then आउ गोटे रूल रही जदि प्रपोजिशंस तुमर थिबो सपोज तुमर affirmative proposition अच्छी से प्रपोजिशन रे if you have any of these words like few, seldom, rarely, scarcely, hardly, then that will be reduced to O proposition, particular negative proposition. Some S is not P because these words are negative in meaning. Few men are honest. आकु तुम्हें केमिति रिड्यूस करिवो सम मेन आर नॉट ऑनेस्ट कारण फ्यू रो माने होची नेगेटिव तेणु एटा जदियो अफर्मेटिव फॉर्म रे अछि तुम्हें ताकू ओ को आनिबो सम मेन आर नॉट ऑनेस्ट किंतु ए फ्यू हेले सेटा पॉजिटिव किंतु फ्यू हेले सेटा नेगेटिव फ्यू मेन आर ऑनेस्ट तमरो आसीबो रिड्यूस करिवो ओ को सम मेन आर नॉट ऑनेस्ट जदि तुमर प्रपोजिशन थिबो फ्यू स्टूडेंट्स आर नॉट प्रेजेंट एटी फ्यू होची नेगेटिव पुणी आउरी गोटे नॉट पसिची तेणु डबल नेगेशन लीड्स टू अफर्मेशन सो हियर इट विल बी रिड्यूस्ड टू आई प्रपोजिशन सम स्टूडेंट्स आर प्रेजेंट educated men are seldom foolish o proposition some educated men are not foolish men are hardly wise some men are not wise barking dogs seldom bite barking dogs are dogs who do not bite scarcely any man is dishonest some men are not dishonest तेणु एगुड़ा तुम्हें ओ प्रपोजिशन को रिड्यूस करिवो कारण ए वर्ड रो मीनिंग टा हैला नेगेटिव तापरे जदि तुमर अफर्मेटिव प्रपोजिशंस थिबो सेथिरे थिबो वर्ड्स लाइक मोस्टली ऑफन जनरली फ्रिक्वेंटली परहैप्स समटाइम्स ओकेजनली ताहले एगुड़ा तुम्हें आई प्रपोजिशन को रिड्यूस करिवो पर्टिकुलर अफर्मेटिव प्रपोजिशन को मिनिस्टर्स आर मोस्टली एजुकेटेड some ministers are educated books are generally readable some books are readable students sometimes commit mistakes एठी कपुला नाही तुमे लेखिबो some students are students who commit mistakes तेणु ए गुडा सबु जदि थिबो ताहले तुमे ताकू आई प्रपोजिशन को रिड्यूस करिवो तेणु से जो वर्ड गुडा तुमरा रहिला generally frequently most often frequently perhaps sometimes ए जदि words गुडा गोटे negative proposition रे रहिला ताहले that will be reduced to o proposition girls are mostly not introvert आकु तुमे not अच्छी mostly अच्छी आकु तुमे करिवो o proposition some girls are not introvert सेई टाइप रो करिवो तापरे you have exclusive proposition काहा को कहा जाए the propositions which contain the words only alone none but those are called exclusive propositions only great scientists are inventors ताकू तुमे केमिति रिड्यूस करिवो all inventors are great scientists a proposition सब्जेक्ट आउ प्रेडिकेट रो प्लेस चेंज कर देला ऑल लगेला ऑल इन्वेंटर्स आर ग्रेट साइंटिस्ट नो एंड ई प्रपोजिशन नो नन डैश ग्रेट साइंटिस्ट आर इन्वेंटर्स देन आई प्रपोजिशन सम ग्रेट साइंटिस्ट आर इन्वेंटर्स तेणु एक्सक्लूसिव प्रपोजिशंस गुड़ा को तुम्हें एमिति भाबरे रिड्यूस करिवो एंड sometimes you have exceptive proposition. Exceptive proposition means when the predicate is affirmed or denied of the subject with some exception that is called exceptive proposition. When the exception is definite that will be reduced to a universal proposition. When the exception is indefinite that will be reduced to a particular proposition. For example, all metals except mercury are solid एठी mercury टा definite अछि तेणु एटा को तुमे करिवो mercury is not solid e proposition ना हेले a proposition all non dash mercury metals are solid किंतु जदि एक्सेप्शन टा इंडेफिनाइट थिबो दैट विल बी रिड्यूस्ड टू ए पर्टिकुलर प्रपोजिशन ऑल द स्टूडेंट्स ऑफ दिस क्लास एक्सेप्ट ए फ्यू आर प्रेजेंट ए फ्यू माने यू डू नॉट नो व्हिच स्टूडेंट्स वर एब्सेंट हु वर एब्सेंट तेणु तमे एठी कोन करिवो लेखिबो आई प्रपोजिशन सम स्टूडेंट्स ऑफ द क्लास आर प्रेजेंट देन सिंगुलर प्रपोजिशन Singular proposition माने जानिचो the proposition which stands for a single object or single individual that is called singular proposition. In a singular proposition if the subject is definite it is universal affirmative, if the subject is indefinite it is particular proposition. Mahanadi is the longest river of Odisha. Mahanadi कहले तमे जानी पारुचो which river I mean. So this is your universal affirmative proposition a proposition. But when I say a boy is crying, a dog is running, a boy, a dog, these are indefinite terms. You cannot know which boy I mean, which dog I mean, then indefinite. So these are your particular propositions. And sometimes you will find that there are some interrogative sentences and exclamatory sentences. Usually these sentences are not propositions, but sometimes they describe something, they give some information. So, they are called propositions. If I say which young man is not ambitious, then this means all young men are ambitious. So, here this will be a proposition. If I say, oh, what a chilly weather, then it means the weather is very cold. This is also a proposition. आउ गोटे केवल रहिला impersonal proposition. Impersonal proposition माने subject is not mentioned. Where subject is not mentioned, you have to mention the subject. If it is the proposition is it is 2 p.m. So, you have to specify the subject. The time is 2 p.m. This is your a proposition, universal affirmative proposition. It is very cold today. Here also subject is not mentioned, then you have to mention the subject that the weather is very cold, and this is your a proposition. So, students, today I discussed 7-fold relation between propositions and 4-fold relation of opposition between propositions and reduction of propositions to their logical forms. Thank you students.